Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We have a very large crowd, so we're just going to wait a few seconds to allow everyone to connect. I will be back in about 30 seconds. Thank you. Hello again, and thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. We're delighted to have you with us for today's session. My name is Kyle Johnson. I'm the editorial events manager here at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I have just a few notes to share about the platform before we begin. Your audio, video, and chat are turned off to streamline the presentation, but please submit any questions at any time through the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of those as possible toward the end of the session. And finally, this is being recorded and will be available in just a few days, so please look for an email letting you know that it's ready. Now, I'm pleased to turn things over to my colleague and our host, Stacy Palmer, who is the editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. Stacy?
Thanks so much, Kyle, and welcome everyone. We're thrilled to have you here. I'm very excited for our conversation. We're joined today by Anne Earhart. Welcome, Anne.
Hello.
Regan Pritzker.
Hi.
Welcome. Stacy Schusterman.
Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Stacey. And Sarah Davidson. Hi, Sarah. Before we begin our discussion, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah, who's CEO of Carnegie UK, to have a terrific announcement about the 2022 winners of the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy. Sarah was a member of the selection committee and can tell you more about the latest recipients of this prestigious honor. Sarah?
Thank you, Stacy, and an additional welcome to everyone joining today's forum. During his lifetime, Andrew Carnegie established more than 20 institutions worldwide. And today, I believe he would be pleased to know that through the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy, these institutions have come together with his descendants to share his legacy. We do so by honouring prominent individuals whose philanthropic goals reflect what Andrew Carnegie's philosophy of giving was, that private wealth should be used for public good. The medal recipients that we will name today stand as proof that philanthropy remains as vital to tackling the daunting challenges facing our world as it was in Andrew Carnegie's time. All 5 medalists used their wealth to find and fund the most effective ways to overcome entrenched problems. They support organizations that are working to protect and preserve our planet, to devise cutting-edge medical treatments, and to ensure that a rising generation of young people from every walk of life are poised to thrive in what is a changing and a challenging world. Already, thousands of people's lives have been transformed for the better as a direct result of their giving. The recipients of the 2022 medals are Manu Chandaria, working in Africa, and in the United States, Lyda Hill, Dolly Parton, Lynn and Stacy Schusterman. I'm also pleased to announce that this year, to mark 20 years since the inaugural Medal of Philanthropy, we will also present the first ever Carnegie Catalyst Award to World Central Kitchen, founded by Chef Jose Andres in 2010. This special recognition honours World Central Kitchen for its extraordinary impact, mobilising volunteers to provide meals in countries affected by humanitarian and natural disasters. Since its inception, World Central Kitchen has served more than 150 million meals in countries around the world and has been one of the most active relief organisations working in Ukraine during the war with Russia. For more information on the Carnegie Medal itself and on all this year's honorees, please see our website at medaloffphilanthropy.org. Speaking as a woman, who herself heads a charitable foundation, it's especially gratifying to see so many women among this year's medalists. Across the philanthropic field, women are bringing fresh ideas and new approaches that are helping to make philanthropy more inclusive and impactful in ways that will benefit many generations to come. I'm delighted that one of the honorees announced today, Stacy Schusterman, is about to join our discussion on women philanthropists, charting a course for change. It's also gratifying to see two previous recipients of the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy among our speakers, Anne Earhart and Regan Pritzker. On behalf of the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy, thank you all for participating, and thank you to the Chronicle of Philanthropy for hosting our forum today. And now back to you, Stacy.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and to all of your colleagues who made such tremendous selections. I had the privilege of knowing Vartan Gregorian over many decades, and I can feel how proud he would have been of the choices you have made. These awards were extremely important to him, and it's very important to all of us that we're lifting up what philanthropy can do and how it can make a difference. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get ready to dig in. As we start today, what I'd really like to do is have each of our panelists tell us a little bit about your foundation's work, the one thing that you want to be sure that we know about. And then I'd like to talk about how the last few years have changed or reinforced the way that you give. We've had so much to go through with the pandemic, the racial reckoning, threats to democracy, and so much else. So that has changed the way people decide what causes to give and how they give. And I'd like to hear from each of you on that. Let me start with you, Regan. Would you talk about that and let us know more about your philanthropy?
Thank you so much, Stacy. It's a total privilege to be here with Anne and Stacy and this wonderful audience. I think the main thing I would want folks to know about my philanthropic journey is just the deep gratitude I have for the shoulders I'm standing on, and how my parents, when they started the Libra Foundation in 2005, really approached that project with an open mind and a growth mindset. And that has set us up as a foundation to be able to continually evolve and shift and change to meet the changing moment and our changing understanding of the field of philanthropy and our role inside of it. I don't think that and maybe because of that, the sort of specific challenges of the pandemic, and the opportunity that came from sort of the white reckoning, I think, that we've experienced in the last couple of years, hasn't exactly changed our approach, but it has definitely underlined and reinforced the need for the philanthropy that we've been doing, which is really deeply rooted in racial justice and equity, and brings a critical eye to the field of philanthropy, which I think is also super important, that philanthropy as it was designed is, has some problematic elements that I think we need to work through and acknowledge if we really want to get to sort of a just and truly equitable world where all people have full agency and voice within our community and access to the resources that they need to thrive. So it hasn't changed our giving, but it really encouraged us, I think, to lean into partnerships and into collaborations and donor organizing so that we could talk more about our approach and our desire to fund Black, Indigenous, and people of color led projects that are building infrastructure in ways that are more durable, so that we could even begin to imagine a world post-philanthropy where we could meet folks' needs in different ways that are more rooted in community and equity and justice. I'll stop there. I could say more, but I'll stop there for now because I want to hear my.
I know that we can hear from all of you for 3 hours, which I wish we had that chance to do. So we are going to move things along. Stacy Schusterman.
Well, I want to join Regan in saying what an honor it is to be here today with Regan and Anne and the Chronicle and Carnegie Foundations. So I want to build on and echo many of the things that Regan said, are principles that we hold as well. So I'm building on also my parents' legacy. They founded the foundation in 1987, and our giving has been rooted in Jewish principles that fortunately are shared by many in society in terms of the pursuit of justice and treating all people with dignity and respect. So our key focus areas, in addition to our Jewish giving, are rooted in advancing racial, gender, and economic equity for all people in the U.S. And we believe that that's essential to building a strong and healthy economy and democracy. And our giving during the pandemic, we did pursue some new avenues of, really doubling down on giving to individuals. But like Regan, many of our core areas stayed the same. In terms of like K-12 education, as we all know, like during the pandemic showed really the importance of quality teachers and curriculum. The pandemic with many women moving out of the workforce really showed the importance of paid leave, access to affordable childcare. Our current times show the importance of women keeping, freedom and control over their bodies to be able to participate fully in the economy. The criminal justice system or criminal legal system, really during the pandemic showed that we're locking up a bunch of people that actually can be productive members of society, and how can we help them do that? So we're working to advance new ways to build community safety. And really the most recent thing that's been highlighted is the erosion in our democracy and the access that people have to be able to vote and access the polls and participate in sharing their voice in our democracy. And so we really just are doubling down on all of those things, like Regan joining collaboratives, listening to communities and getting their input on how we can more effectively work with them to help solve the problems that these communities are most impacted by. And then taking a long-term approach. So while we're looking for short and medium-term indicators, making multi-year general operating grants to our grantees so they can be the most nimble in addressing the problems that we both share agendas to help make better.
That's really crucial. When I talk to grantees, that's the thing that they most need is more dependable long-term support so that they can do their work. So I know I speak for many of the grant seekers in the audience that that's hugely important. Anne, can you tell us a little bit more about your philanthropy and also answer that question about how the past few years have changed or reinforced your giving approach?
Yeah, hello everyone. And I just want to say congratulations to Stacy on the Carnegie Award. It was a wonderful experience and I think you'll enjoy it. And yeah, I think both Regan and Stacy talked about some of the ways that we like to operate in collaborations and whatnot. But Marisa Foundation is about 30 years old. I founded it and it's grown over the years. And our primary mission is the environment, focused on marine conservation. We also do environmental health and women's issues in the Los Angeles and Orange County area, which, as you all know, is larger than many states. Our general approach has really not changed very much during the pandemic, even though our grantees were, obviously losing funding, programs were not able to be done, staffing issues, but we felt it was really important to, continue funding those grantees, even if what they were doing changed. We did do a couple of retreats for NGO leaders and had them come together, interact, trade notes with their peers, with an emphasis on self-care and how to deal with the enormous stresses that they were undergoing, trying to keep their organizations going, staffing together. And but generally our approach to things didn't change that much.
That's great. And I'm really glad to hear you put that emphasis on self-care for nonprofit leaders. It's been a tough few years for all of them. Yeah. And the support that you all provide in ways that go beyond money is crucial. So thank you for that. Stacy, you mentioned that your foundation focuses on gender equity, and especially because we've gathered women philanthropists today, I wanted to drill down a little bit more on that. And I know that one of the things, one of your colleagues wrote a terrific piece for us about the tensions between dealing with the threats to democracy and issues of abortion rights. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how you're thinking about those issues and how they intersect?
So Brooke Kelly-Green, who leads our gender and reproductive equity portfolio, co-authored a piece with Pamela Schiffman of the Democracy Alliance. And our aim is really to encourage funders to see that support for abortion access and support for democracy are not an either or, but in fact a both and. And for many democracy funders, including us, democracy is about voter access and voting integrity. And we are funding to make sure that both of those are true for the upcoming and ongoing elections. But we also believe that people's ability, and I know other funders do too, I'm not, but we also believe that people being able to fully participate and have equal opportunities is essential to that. So that if half our population doesn't control their bodies and their lives and their futures, they can't really participate and have full access and participate in our democracy. And so it was really just encouraging people to understand the importance of looking at women's and the gender issue, reproductive access and knowledge. This really embeds all of our gender work, I would say, in that gender funding receives, I think it's like 2 or 3% women and girls funding of all philanthropic funding. And with making up half the population, we are just, preventing women and girls from having full access in a way that can be a win-win for everyone around the world. And so we're participating in collaboratives, and we have a team, the Collaborative for Gender and Reproductive Equity, and our team that work to expand women's leadership and prevent harassment at home and in the workplace, and expand reproductive knowledge and access. And so the article was really just an opportunity to remind democracy funders to think about women and women's freedom and control of our bodies as a part of a robust and a democracy.
Thank you. Stacy, you mentioned democracy multiple times in that answer, and it's a really important topic for all of us. And I want to talk about advocacy and its importance to you and your philanthropy, Regan and Anne. I'd be curious to think about, how do you think about advocacy as part of your charitable work? And then how do you think about how that balances with your political giving, if you do that as well? Obviously, there are different kinds of things, but do you think about them complementing? I'd love to hear, your thought process on that. Anne, would you like to start?
Sure. Yes, we of course do support advocacy very, very carefully, because as foundations, we have a bright line we need to follow. But we support voter education, environmental advocacy, and voter participation. And all of these are long-term efforts. And I do political giving, which is obviously completely separate. And really it's fluid. But as we emerge into this time of voter suppression and things like that, my giving in those areas has ramped up separately from the foundation, of course.
Great. Regan, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I agree with Anne that it's critical to the work we do. I like to think that with the Libra Foundation and the Catalyst Foundation, the two foundations that I'm affiliated with, that advocacy is really inherent to how we give in the first place, which is to prioritize funding to folks who are closest to the issues we're trying to solve. Often that means Black, Indigenous, people of color-led projects where our funding helps to remedy an imbalance in funding. Stacy pointed out to the lack of funding to women in general, women and girls in general. That same issue is true in terms of a racial analysis of philanthropy. And so by funding projects that are rooted in community and led by folks who are closest to the issues we're trying to solve, I hope that in and of itself creates a shift in power and agency that can result in stronger advocacy. and that we all benefit from. And I also think that this idea of funding organizing and movement building is also a piece of that story. So, taking a group like National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is a 501c3 led by Ajen Poo, who's an incredible leader and is mobilizing advocacy for domestic workers' rights in ways that are fundamentally shifting the landscape in terms of moving towards more of a care economy. That nonprofit project, the 501c3 side of their work, is incredibly powerful in terms of their mobilization and organizing efforts to bring more and more voices to the table and into the sort of, centers of power, like all the way to the White House kind of thing. But they also did start a 501c4. And I know Stacy in our prep conversations mentioned that she's seeing a lot of that as well. 501c3 projects that are starting, 501c4 organizations that of course are separate, but are very much aligned in terms of their mission. And they're able to be more explicit about their, candidacy support and, lobbying support. And so that's been really exciting to be able to support both National Domestic Workers Alliance and Care in Action, just as an example. I also feel like I resisted being a political funder for many, many years because of the unsavory feeling of being a wealthy person influencing politics in a disproportionate way, but have learned through working with Crystal Haling at the Lieber Foundation, our amazing executive director, and other advisors from my mom as well, that you can be a political donor in ways that actually reinforce grassroots organizing and shift that power to the organizations you're supporting, because then they're the ones with the dollars who are then doing the candidate work. So I partner with groups like Way to Win, Movement Voter Project, Groundswell Fund, places where I know I can contribute financial resources, C4 dollars, but in ways that are then going to be channeled towards grassroots organizing and base building, in ways that, as if I'm only giving money to candidate and the Democratic Party or any party that isn't as possible, it isn't as powerful. So I really feel like I've learned from grant making, effective grant making that builds grassroots power, to do political giving that does the same thing. And it's exciting to see what's happening. It's an uphill struggle. I talk a lot to other philanthropic donors about expanding into C4 work, because just think the opportunity is really huge and it's really necessary. And for people like me who find it that there are a lot of challenges to it, it's exciting to know that there are ways to move political money in ways that are really resonant and build relationship in ways that I think are in service of our collective good.
Thank you for that, and especially for talking about your evolution in thinking and how you learned about that. And that's what I want to talk about in the next question, because you're being honored and in the spotlight for your effective philanthropy, and you're constantly learning. All of you have talked about that as well. If you were helping other people in your position think about, like, what are some of the things you'd love to see them doing? Could you name one or two things that you would like to see other philanthropists thinking about and doing more of? Stacy, would you like to start?
Sure. And I'd like to build on what Anne and Regan said, because I 100% agree with what they said. So our family also does both, as Regan said, C3 and C4, and our partners also with NDWA and Care in Action, and believe very strongly in helping groups that are doing C3 work then mobilize their constituencies to be active participants in the democratic process. We work with a group called the Pro-Democracy Alliance that is working with many community groups to help them have the resources to reach both voters and potential voters, people who haven't been active in the democratic process, to learn about the importance and how they can be active voters. So I think that, philanthropists really thinking about how they set up, we have all of our employees who are members, who are employees of an LLC, so that we can, do all this, as both Anne and Regan said, legally and above board and all of that, as we all want to do. And then the couple other messages would be, give now and give generously, in terms of the, multi-year general operating grants as much as possible. And to think about this work as the sum of us, Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, where we are stronger together as a society when all voices are lifted up. The possibility of joining funder collaboratives as a way to leverage your team's knowledge and scope of impact. And then remembering that while not every day is joyous, overall the work is very fulfilling, and that really just even trying to be someone who helps solves problems is very rewarding. I actually, when I entered philanthropy, it was very challenging, and one motivational thing I did was get a tattoo that right on my wrist that reminds me, it says Hineni every day, of Rabbi Tarfon's saying that it is not our job to complete the task, but neither are we allowed to desist.
Before I turn to Anne, and I'm so glad to see the tattoo, that was unexpected. Before I turn to Anne, let me just remind the audience that we will be taking questions at the end, and so please put them in the chat box if you have them. Anne, what advice do you have?
Good words of wisdom, Stacy, because sometimes I feel like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill for sure. But my advice to other funders would be to, and first off, just keep it simple. I'm a fairly small foundation with not really many staff. And so we do a couple of things that enable us to operate like that. One is use a community foundation or a group like Global Green Grants. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time to give. You can find great partners. And that helps you, streamline administrative processes and grant making. But find organizations that are working effectively on the issue and give general support and give general long-term support. And this is especially true, I think, with smaller organizations that, my thought is I want this organization to be doing what they do best and not spending their time fundraising. And I consider keeping the lights on and the rent paid might be the best way to support those organizations. And it may not be very sexy, but it's important to just let them do their job. Don't ask, on that too, don't ask for excessive reporting. And one of the things that we found to be very, very effective is being involved in networks and funder collaboratives. And we've had a couple of networks and collaborations. I'm thinking in particular about the Health and Environmental Funders Network that have been tremendously productive, and none of us could have gotten there by ourselves. Another one is Plastic Solutions Fund, Oceans 5. So I think work in networks and collaborations because the sum will be greater. And fund your passion and have some fun doing it.
Great. Regan, what would you say?
Thanks, Anne and Stacy. Those were really helpful suggestions for me also. I appreciate that reinforcement and reminder. I was building on Anne's comments, I was gonna mention also, don't immediately build new infrastructure, and even maybe don't start a new foundation. Consider the possibility that you might want to spend out into these existing funds or the existing infrastructure in the field. There's a big call to action from movement organizers and from folks in the field to prevent this especially the white accumulated wealth that sits in many of these larger foundations, to move from the assumption that you would have a foundation endowment that's then invested in the stock market and you're spending just a percentage of the proceeds from those investments. Essentially, you're an investment fund that with a side business doing charitable giving. Really think about that. Is that what you want? And are you able to invest your endowment in a way that reflects the values you're trying to manifest in the world if you are creating a foundation endowment of that kind? Part of that also is to really come with an open mind and a learner's mindset so that you can, assume that the passion and the motivation that you're bringing to doing something philanthropic is the beginning of your learning journey. And that I think it's been just so powerful for me to be in relationship with folks who are willing to challenge me and push me in my learning. I mentioned already Crystal Haling at the Lieber Foundation was the first person who handed me a copy of oh my God, I'm spacing on her name, oh my gosh, a book about white privilege and racial education. And so, I think that shouldn't have been her job, but I appreciate that she took the time to give me that book so that it, helped me to continue on a journey of education about my white identity and what it means to be a person with accumulated inherited wealth in this country, and really to start an analysis that is ongoing about where that wealth accumulation came from, why was it possible, and what is my responsibility as a white inheritor to potentially redistribute that wealth to really achieve the goals that I want of a liberated and just society. So I think that education, whether it's through racial justice training, white privilege training, or if you're funding, for example, the environment, to really put yourself in learning spaces to understand what environmental movement organizers are calling for in terms of a worldview grounded in just transition. So I could highlight Movement Generation and Climate Justice Alliance as two organizations that helped me to really evolve my worldview from when I started in philanthropy, feeling just kind of nervous and uncomfortable about my approach, but with ideas and passion to bring to the table. And now I just feel a lot more informed and in alignment with the folks we're supporting. And it's helped me to, continue to push myself to not just sit with the assumptions of the philanthropic model, but to really think beyond it, to think of like, what could a world look like beyond philanthropy?
While you're all in advice mode, I'd like to tap you for a different kind of question. I'm sure you and the colleagues at your foundations get hit up quite a bit with a number of pitches for support. There are things that work, there are things that don't. I'd love to hear a little bit about what has been effective for you and your colleagues and what things you would rather not have fundraisers do so that they can all learn. Stacy, would you like to start?
Sure. So first off, most of the grant requests we receive go to our staff, who I have tremendous amount of, I value them tremendously. I couldn't do the work without them. So they bring a lot of expertise to the table. So that I would say that, the most important thing are obviously the alignment of the grant requests with the strategies that we're pursuing, and then very, very much around the people who are running the organizations. And then, have they thought through the financial model that they're doing? We fund both pilots and scaling of work that's based on evidence. So showing the thought process for new ideas, and then particularly we do the bulk of our funding is focused on scaling things that have evidence. So showing that evidence. And then we are asking, all of our grantees to give us information on the demographic makeup of their leadership teams. We believe has been touched on already that, too little capital goes to organizations led by women and people of color. And we want to see that funding increase and very much want to walk that walk in the field. And then also, pitches that are part of collaboratives, joining together with other funders, thinking through these complex issues. We're, members, as I mentioned, of several collaboratives, and particularly like Blue Meridian does a lot of this building, scaling on what works. And so, how are funders thinking together and together with the communities that we're trying to serve to how to solve these complex issues.
Anne?
Yeah, as Stacy said, I do very few of the proposals, and we have kind of a process for filtering things. Otherwise, we'd be inundated with everything. But again, it's pretty simple. We want a very clear description of whatever threat or project they intend to work on, a clear description of how they are going to deal with that, and basically how they will pay for it. And something that over the years we have seen a bit of are some pretty unclear budgets, I will just say. So a clear budget is very, very helpful. And just one thing I forgot with my, kind of how to fund things, occasionally take risks. I mean, sometimes you'll have someone who they haven't done anything really that prepares them for whatever project they're trying to do, except they've got a lot of passion for it. And so we have taken risks more than a couple of times, and it has generally paid off. So that's about it.
That's terrific. Thank you. Regan?
Great advice all around. I would just start by acknowledging that I also had to reach out to, because I'm not the one who receives usually and processes grant requests for Libra and Katali. So I reached out to Amaka Agba, who's the CEO of the Katali Foundation, and she shared some advice that I thought was super helpful. And the first one is that, to really look at who's representing the project, who does the project represent, who's going to benefit from this funding, and looking for projects that that support women and people of color-led projects. It's a bonus if there's alignment across different program areas for the Katali Foundation. That's mindfulness and healing justice, restorative economics, and environmental justice. And looking for projects that have some immediate benefit can be a priority if they can really show the pathway to the immediate improvement in quality of life or agency, especially when there's a move from kind of a dependency model to a more to greater self-determination and sustainability for that community and that project. We left projects that are clear about their vision and pathway to achieve that vision. So really rooted in a worldview and a creative and rich imagination of the future world we're trying to manifest. And we really appreciate projects that lean into trust. It's there's such a power discrepancy, and it's part of sort of my critique of philanthropy, this idea of like who holds the money makes all the decisions. So we at both of the foundations I'm affiliated with really tried to do what we can to bring ourselves down to the level of the grantees and really work as partners and allies. And so groups that kind of acknowledge the challenges they're facing and lean into an honest assessment of what they need and what they're facing helps us to be in deeper relationship and hopefully be more helpful in the long term when we join in partnership.
Thanks so much. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to turn to those right away and try to answer as many of them as we can. There are lots of them on different topics and of great substance. But Stacy, I'm going to ask you first. People want to hear more about the tattoo and tell you a little bit more about what it truly means, and they didn't catch everything you said. So can you tell the tattoo story again?
Yes. So when I left business and went into philanthropy, I was surprised by sometimes the problems that we're trying to solve are not always approached with, rationality and data. Whereas in business, if you're not a very data-driven, organization with a well-developed strategy, you don't succeed. But in all of these issues, there's a lot of politics that get in. That's why I think each of us is involved in policy and advocacy, because you think, okay, solving poverty, these things, you would look and say, well, what are the best programs? But it doesn't always work out that way. And so our foundation, I was involved in 2 political battles that we lost very early on. And and for the wrong reasons, really very illogical, politically driven reasons. We lost. So I was like, wow, how am I going to do this work? Given that I believe the data and strategy, people, all of these things are so important. So the tattoo is just a small reminder to me about the importance of trying. So we stay present in the work, even when it is difficult. And so I'll just, Rabbi Tarfon is the rabbi I was quoting, who says it is not our job to complete the task, but neither are we allowed to desist. Meaning that we have an obligation to try to make the world a better place, and a better place for all people is what we are trying to model.
Wonderful. Thank you for telling us all about that. And embedded in your question and the way you answered that question was something that other people want to know about who've been listening to you all talk. They'd like to hear a little bit more about how you determine grantee performance and how to gauge impact. Do you use any empirical tools or science-based evidence? And who wants to answer that?
No, I'm happy to start. We work together with the grantees to set benchmarks, milestones, and shared objectives of the grant. So I think as Anne and Regan touched on, you're going to pick grantees that have alignment with the objectives you're trying to achieve overall. If it's ending mass incarceration, we're working with grantees that are focused on that, and they will come with a strategy, and then over the life of the grant, what are benchmarks in terms of either policy wins, people reached, fines and fees reduced. What are evidence that we can look for reach and accomplishments, and even if it's knowledge gained also can be a very important element. One thing I failed to mention before was a lot of our grants come with doing research alongside the grant to be, gathering evidence, to be showing other funders and the government overall, the field, here are things that work to help solve these problems.
That's really important. Anna, Regan, did you want to weigh in on that?
I would just quickly say that my mom and I were actually just talking about this question the other day, and she made a comment that I thought was pretty important about the fact that often philanthropists are asked about how we assess the work we're funding. Rarely are we asked how we assess our own performance as grant makers. And so I loved that twist, because I think that's also important. And we also, I'll answer that question, which is that we regularly assess our grant making by surveying our grantee community and asking them what we need to be doing better and differently. So we believe in data, but we use it on both sides of the relationship to really stay in right relationship. I appreciated, Stacy, that you pointed out that the main thing is to ask the grantee partners what their assessments of success are, and I think that's that resonated for me as well.
Yeah, I think that we're very aligned on this in terms of if philanthropy can't just be in a tell. I think it's very common that people will say, well, because our families made this money, therefore we're very smart. And just because a family made money in a certain field doesn't mean they actually are smart in the area of the problems they're trying to help fix. And that's where listening to grantees and people most impacted becomes so important. And then it also is an opportunity to check for philosophical alignment, because you want to be partners with grantees. And then to build on what Regan said, we work with this group, Center for Effective Philanthropy, that goes out every couple of years and ask our grantees on an anonymous basis to give us feedback so we can improve our grant making process. And I think it's important for philanthropists to do that, as Regan said.
Anne, did you want to weigh in on that? Or
I think Regan and Stacy have really
great.
Spoken well.
There's so many questions. I'm happy to move on to the next one, because we're going to be challenged to get to all of them. Beth writes, thank you for doing the conscious and intentional work that you're all doing. Very inspirational. What advice might you have for those of us working for these causes to get smaller donors to work together on a common agenda? And for those of us who are much smaller donors who want to make a large impact on those issues of importance to have the greatest chance of positive change?
Well, one thing that the John and Laura Arnold Foundation, which I think is they do phenomenal work. They at one time had on their website, a bunch of an access to kind of a what works database. But I think that in place of that, what they have done, what I think many foundations, including us, have done is really talk about on our websites what the work of our grantees. And so obviously you're taking a leap of faith if you want to go by what we're funding, but when we're funding it, it's with a vote of confidence. And so when we talk about grantees on our website, it would be totally wonderful if smaller donors wanted to, start with, here is a list of, you can read websites of donors and say, here's the philosophy and the objectives of that donor. And here are grantees that they are funding in pursuit of those objectives. And I think it's a great way for fellow funders to be building on the work of others. So we're not all, repeating the same work. And that's actually a great way, joining collaboratives is another way of doing that, where you're joining together with funders. That's a great thing for grantees because they're only having to answer a set of questions once and report out data once. Giving circles are another way of doing that. There are a lot of women giving circles that people can join. Since we're women on this call, we support giving circles because it's also a great way for people to share thoughts, concerns, ideas, and come together to do the due diligence once rather than each of us doing it independently.
I totally agree. I would just add also community foundations are another great resource for building relationships and community with other smaller funders in your area. I also feel like, and this was mentioned in another question, which I'm not sure we'll have time to get to, but philanthropy gets a lot of airtime because we move resources at a certain scale. But people who are not as wealthy are actually more generous, typically in terms of the amount of resources they give relative to their income, to their, in their wealth. And so I think it's incredibly important to remember that when we, when we think about what makes change happen, it's better if we're looking at lots of small contributions from a community of people who are all organized together to create a change for their community or for the things that they care about. Then it's a problem that I face in philanthropy to sort of check and create accountability for myself, because having sort of a disproportionate impact can be seen as a positive thing, but it can also lead to unintended negative consequences. So I really applaud and want to celebrate the smaller donors and the folks who just give. They don't even think of it as philanthropy, right? That's not a word they would use. It's mutual aid. It's sharing with a neighbor. It's, how you're organizing your life to be generous and to build a community that works together to solve problems.
I want to add two other resources as well. Regan mentioning community foundations caused me to think about it. One of it is there are some giving collaboratives that maybe people can't join at picking the grantee level, but can find the resources. One of those is Audacious, which is a combination of Bridgespan and TED, and they have a great website with really strong grantees. And the other is Lever for Change, which runs a prize and then has all of the potential grantees, all the people who made it past all the organizations that made it past a certain level that they recommend as potential grantees. So there are also re-granters. So Regan mentioned Groundswell is one. We are working with one called Resources for RAD, called Resources for Abortion Delivery, which is going to be trying to help women who are living in banned states access the abortion healthcare that they need in states where abortion is still legal.
And I've seen a couple people ask about how to find out more about collaboratives, and Bridgespan did a study of them. And if you just type in Bridgespan and collaborative, I bet you're going to find it right away. So definitely an area of interest. And I did notice when I was doing background research on all of the panelists that all of you are very, very engaged in collaborative work and think it's important. I want to turn to another question from somebody who's anonymous, who says, I see a lot of women who have the capacity to give greatly, but get caught up in worrying about unintended consequences, and that stops them from moving forward in their giving. What advice would you give to these women, especially who are newer in their journey and truly want to make a difference?
I love this question. It just came up recently in a conversation with a friend who was in this exact situation. And it's an interesting time. You know, we're uncertain in our culture at this moment if we celebrate wealth and the giving of wealthy people, or if we condemn it and, you know, have a critique of the, you know, this sort of, again, part of this reckoning of how is it possible for certain people to accumulate wealth and more challenging for others? And I think that's an important reckoning that we should be facing. At the same time, I do think those of us who are privileged enough to be in a position to have access to resources need to move through that discomfort and the uncertainty about how it's going to look or how it's going to land, to find some way to engage and move resources, ideally at scale. For me, what has been most helpful is, again, starting from a sort of open learner's mindset and understanding and appreciating that there are things I don't know. And if I do give without a community around me and a learning pathway, that I will make mistakes, and that they, well, first of all, some amount of mistakes are okay. That's one thing. But that I can prevent sort of the worst unintended consequences by being in right relationship with a diversity of people. And that includes your closest advisors. I think if you're interested in funding social justice, for example, make sure that you do research to find advisors who are working specifically in that space. You know, there's a big range of advisors out there. So I think finding the right kind of advisors and support around you is really important. And then to figure out, what does accountability look like for you? So how do you balance your kind of instinct to give to a certain cause or in a certain way with feedback and a sort of a checks and balances with the communities that you're working with? So I think go for it. But make sure you're surrounded by people who are willing to be honest with you when you say something that doesn't seem like a good idea or is a misstep or brings a different advice and perspective to the field. I worked with Climate Justice Alliance in a period when they were developing this wonderful, very simple tool that they launched at the Global Climate Summit in San Francisco in 2000. When was that? I want to say 19. And the 4 principles were just when you're looking at what you're about to do, just do a quick check. Who's at the table? Who's part of the decision-making that is deciding on this approach? Make sure that it's diverse and representing the communities you're working in. So who's at the table? Who really benefits from the resources that are flowing? How does it change or shift power? And then the 4th question is, how does it, what are the unintended negative consequences that might result from this action? And so those are good questions to also guide folks as they get started.
And I'll just add a couple of things, and it was a great answer, but is not doing something leaves the problem as it is. And so Anne mentioned this about taking risk, and my dad used to say, don't be afraid to drill dry holes. And so we've been repeating that in our work of it is important to take risk, get the data that you can, but again, not taking action is often worse than the unintended consequences.
And I think this question might have been prompted by something you said about things you did during the pandemic. So I'm going to give it to you first. What tips do you have for people in our space who are on the verge of burnout? I have several staff members who are rethinking a career in nonprofits, and it makes me sad because they're very talented, passionate, and full of good ideas. We need people like them, but they're leaving for greener pastures with more perks like higher pay and 100% remote working environment. How do we compete with that? Did any of the leaders you've talked to have some good ideas?
Well, that is pretty tough. The nonprofit sector is not known for its high pay and short work hours. And I think it's a matter of just consciousness about, this is obviously a job that is never, ever, ever done. We wish, but we're pretty much always behind. And just realize, I think, as Stacy's tattoo, we've got to just do what we can. We may not complete the task, but I think, you have to very consciously listen to your body and take care of yourself and not put yourself at the end of the line. You've got staff issues, all kinds of problems they might be having, say, during the pandemic, but you're having a lot of issues too, taking care of all of that and of everyone and your organization. Just be kind to yourself. Remember to take good care of yourself. Meditate, take walks. That was one of the kind of really silly but simple suggestions by some people. Get up from your desk in the middle of the day, go take a walk out in nature if you can. So some pretty simple things, but just again, you have to remember not to put yourself at the end of the line.
Usually,
go ahead. I was just going to add that I think it's also good for philanthropists and foundations to hear that message, obviously, so that we can do a better job of moving resources to nonprofits in ways that allow space for collective care and organizational wellness and well-being. There are specific projects that support things like sabbatical leaves for nonprofit executives or staff. So look into those resources. I don't have them top of mind, but there are projects that do that. Increasingly, there's a focus on healing justice, which is a program area of the Catalyzing Foundation, where as a whole program area, we're looking at how healing and wellness needs to be centered, especially when you're funding communities of color. And I actually had to take a leave of absence myself this winter, and Crystal Haling pointed out to me that, in sort of reassuring me that it was okay to step back and take care of myself for a while. She said, it's not a marathon and this isn't a sprint, it's a relay. And you have to know when to pass the baton, and we have to know when to pick it up and run with it. And I just thought that was it made me feel so wonderful. And so I shared that message with other folks working in nonprofits. Y'all have been working really hard. You're not crazy. It's been a really hard time. It's going to continue to be challenging, and continue to advocate for yourselves, both within your organizations and to your funders, so that you can find that balance.
Great. Thank you. We have time just for one very quick question and answer. And this question says, the Women's Philanthropy Institute report, Women Give 2019, Gender and Giving Across Communities of Color, finds that generosity is a value shared by all communities, and that women across race and ethnicity are leading through philanthropy. More specifically, a donor's race does not have a significant effect on the amount given to charity when taking income and other factors into account. Yet this is a very white presenting panel. Can you speak to that? And Regan, I was wondering if you would take that one.
I just really appreciate this question. I feel like I dropped the ball in not raising it myself when I was invited to participate. I think that's so important. And if we had a panel of all men here, I would be furious. And so I take that critique to heart, and really think we all need to remember that this is not the domain of white people. At the same time, it is true that boards of foundations are predominantly white. And I think this is connected to the roots of racial capitalism in this country that provided opportunities to some and not to all. I think of the example of the GI Bill that helped my grandfather go to law school after the war. And that was not afforded to the Black servicemen who were coming back from World War II in the same way. And so that's just a specific example, but there is a difference, and yet we have incredible role models in philanthropy. There's the donors from the Donors of Color Network is a whole community of donors of color who would make amazing panelists at an event like this. So I think it's good that we recognize the problematic element of philanthropy being disproportionately white, and that we celebrate philanthropists of color who are leading the way in many areas, and we need to be listening to and learning from them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you, panelists, for such an outstanding conversation. We could talk all day. And Regan and Stacy, what a joy it's been to talk to you. And I want to thank the audience for all of your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we'll find other ways to address them. And I look forward to joining you in other forums.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thanks, Anne,
Yes,
and
thank you.
Stacy and Stacy.
Thanks, everybody.
care.
Enjoyed this.
Have a wonderful day.